unfathomable. That's how we would have described the world we live in today when we first hosted tonight's speaker back in 2021 of August. Much like they used to say about the British flag, the sun seems never to set on the Malones as they travel the world almost weekly to warn of manipulation, peeling back the layers of obfuscation, coordination, and deception that we have been and are increasingly subjected to with little awareness. As their eyes opened, the Malones have taken the world with them, not hiding their lights and learning under a bushel, but sharing truth as they discover it, sharing it at a great cost. Non-stop target of delegitimization, that's a hard word, but you all know what it is. Dr. Malone has been called controlled opposition, he's been the victim of online trollery, he's been shadow banned, blacklisted, he's been smeared by corporate media, on and on it's gone, right? Imagine decades of building a career, almost 100 academic peer-reviewed publications to your name, only to find yourself being, quote, presented as an untrustworthy nutcase. We know this drama, I would say trauma, because we also saw it endured by forum speakers Jay Bhattacharya, Dr. Scott Atlas, Dr. Scott Jensen, Steve Kirsch, and many, many more. Dr. Malone is an internationally recognized virologist, immunologist, clinical research and regulatory affairs expert, federal contract proposal and project manager, and the original inventor of mRNA delivery and vaccination as technology. He is the author of Lies My Government Told Me. And he and his wife, Jill, Dr. Jill Glasspool Malone, a very accomplished scientist, extraordinary researcher and writer in her own right, have a new book coming out in a few weeks, Psy-War, Enforcing the New World Order. They also publish a prolific Substack, Who is Robert Malone, which I highly commend to you. Jill, would you please stand to be recognized and thanked, because you're really... I don't really quite... Jill's behind the scenes, but trust me, this is a two-for deal. This is an extraordinary woman, and much of what you know about Robert Malone and from Robert Malone comes out of the melding of these two brilliant minds. We're so glad you're here, Jill. Thank you. The Malones are invited all over the world to the most prestigious and lively events where truth is sought, some of which are quite fancy. They return here to our rather humble venue, and I think that demonstrates their values as they join us tonight for our 4th August, to cut through the dense fog of propaganda, much of it spun right here in Silicon Valley. They're back tonight because we share the value of promoting truth and individual liberty, even though the truth is often terribly, terribly difficult to absorb. Please help me welcome back very dear friend of the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley, Dr. Robert Malone.
So the title that you were given really briefly was Weaponized Fear, and that's kind of a big catch-all. I'm going to start, and this is really an extension of a discussion that I gave at the Mises Institute a couple weeks ago that's gone viral. It forced me to think through some things. Woof! Another friend, thank you. Forced me to think through some things that have been troubling me about kind of the economic basis and underpinning of what we've been seeing. And I've become convinced that a lot of these concepts that we've been working with, medical freedom, fundamental rights, constitutional rights, libertarianism, all of that is boiling down to economics. And one of the things that's really opened my eyes is been in interacting with various leaders in the populist movements in Europe. I'm convinced that basically the bond market is controlling the range of political options that we're allowed to even consider. We're now in a position where basically big transnational finance is defining the nature of how we live and what we're allowed to do. And for me, that's pretty troubling, because that's a very small cohort and they have their own biases. And I think that's self-evident. And so I'm really starting to retool my thinking and my presentations to place economics a little bit more at the center. But right now, that's still my thinking, and our structuring of the world around us is still very much focused on coming to terms with what we've encountered, what Jill and I have been subjected to over the last 4 years, and which all of you have been subjected to, which is this weaponized fear. I call it psychological bioterrorism, and all of the derivatives associated with it, the weaponization of the existential fear of infectious disease. And it's not just the existential fear, big word, fear of death. Associated with infectious disease that's been used and deployed and weaponized in order to control populations and your behavior and your political activity, your speech, your ability to associate with others, etc. But it's really been used together with a lot of other issues now. We've seen this kind of broaden out. We certainly, I think for a lot of us and for me, the COVID crisis allowed me to better understand the veil of propaganda. Your president mentioned the other day, earlier today, in a very kind of sly, tangential way, he talked about another Irish president that had experienced a coup. For me, my kind of first memory, when I was still here in the Palo Alto area, actually I was in Menlo Park being babysat by a cousin who was older, was the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And we were all told a story about that, and now we know, based on newer research and emerging information, that the data suggests that the president was not assassinated from behind by somebody firing nothing like a modern sniper rifle from a great distance at the Texas Book Depository. That doesn't fit with the data now in terms of a reconstruction of the autopsy, imaging, etc., in terms of the bullet penetration patterns in the brain. We have been living under a lie, a story that's been told to all of us, told and retold and retold and defended in so many different ways, and multiple administrations since then have basically refused, all the way through Trump, refused to come clean about this lie, about what we've been told and the manipulations around it. Start off with a quote from George Bernard Shaw. All censorships exist to prevent anyone from challenging current conceptions and existing institutions. All progress is initiated by challenging current conceptions and executed by supplanting existing institutions. Consequently, the first condition of progress is the removal of censorship. This is something that we should all agree on, and if there is any glue that binds Silicon Valley, it's the commitment to progress, it's the commitment to innovation, it's the commitment to creating new solutions for existing technical problems. Those solutions, the human race cannot evolve. We cannot solve the great Malthusian problems that are projected as confronting us if we're confined to only being able to share those ideas and thoughts and beliefs that are approved. And in case you had any misconceptions about where this is all going, just pay attention to my friends in the UK. I was just speaking to Andrew Bridgen earlier today. I mean, they're rounding people up and locking them up for the crime of posting stuff on Facebook on a routine basis now, and it's 20 years in jail. You think it was bad for John Strand? Okay? And by the way, they are talking about extraditing Americans that are posting information on social media having to do with the riots in the UK. I don't know about you, I'm not flying through Heathrow again, not until this is over, not until we've had a turnover in the current Prime Minister. Okay? In a 1963 book, Eichmann in Jerusalem, A Report of the Modality of Evil, philosopher and political thinker Hannah Arendt developed a new way of thinking about evil, one which I find useful in thinking about the COVID crisis. We all talk about the conspiracies, who the puppet masters are. Hannah Arendt really gave us a different way of thinking about evil, and we use this term evil now routinely, which is a little strange. I mean, I can't express what I've experienced over the last 4 years, what we've all experienced, without reaching to the language of faith. It seems like it's the only language that applies. These concepts of good and evil and fundamental morality and the rights of individuals and the proper way of being in the world, it seems to only be captured by these classic documents that form the foundation for the Judeo-Christian tradition. Hannah Arendt, the concept of the banality of evil is often misunderstood as suggesting that evil is ordinary or common. However, her intention was to highlight the fact that evil is not necessarily driven by a desire for destruction or chaos, but rather a lack of thought in consideration for the consequences of one's actions. The banality of evil refers to the fact that evil can be committed by ordinary, unremarkable people, including bureaucrats, who are not driven by a desire for evil necessarily, but rather by a lack of moral imagination and a failure to think critically about the consequences of their actions. Now, I don't know about Tony Fauci. I was asked on War Room this morning to talk about him, and let's just park him. There are some people that I think are kind of dark triad personalities, but the majority of the folks that I deal with in D.C. are just family people, for the most part, getting along, trying to get their pensions, and doing what they're told, much like happened in Nazi Germany. Not saying they're Nazis, just saying that there is a fundamental evil that emerges when people don't question and think what they're doing, what the orders are, and they just comply. That's what Hannah was talking about. So we have this new book, Psy-War, Enforcing the New World Order. Now, immediately when that went up on the Mises Institute, YouTube tagged it with a Wikipedia entry that says that the New World Order is basically a cluster of conspiracy theories. The timeline on the word conspiracy theory, remember, conspiracy theory was injected into the language of America by the CIA after the Kennedy assassination. Okay? So it's like a catch-all. If you want to delegitimize somebody, you just say they're talking about a conspiracy theory. I counsel that people should talk about hypotheses, and then we can kind of get away from that categorization. My expertise in this topic of psychological warfare derives from 4 years of experience in this technology and daily efforts over that period to understand what I was experiencing, what Jill was experiencing, and frame those experiences within a broader context. Basically, I've been subjected to it, and I didn't even understand where it was coming from, what it meant, how it happened. People that, I used to have good relations with the press back in the day. I was a source. And then to have all this turned on me, Atlantic Monthly. I used to read Atlantic Monthly. Rolling Stone was kind of the hip and cool mag if you wanted to learn about what was happening in the recording industry. I used to subscribe to the New York Times and the Washington Post. Now I can hardly even look at the headlines. Over the last year, since I last visited with you, I had a few insights that I'd particularly like to share, and I'm going to try to work through these quickly before Jane hooks me off the stage. Number one, psychological bioterrorism, the systematic weaponization of existential fear of infectious disease to advance social, political, and financial objectives. Number two, the consequences of nation states deploying modern psychological warfare technology developed for offshore combat and conflicts on their own citizens. Okay, this is routine now in virtually all the Western nations, especially the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance nations of the United States, Canada, Great Britain, New Zealand, and Australia. Third, this is probably the most important one. I hope I can get to it and cover it well enough, particularly for Silicon Valley. The role of economics, and in particular surveillance capitalism. I didn't coin that term, I just find it really enlightening. As it interacts with propaganda, censorship, industrial complex, and public-private partnerships. So let's launch into it. Overriding all of this is what is essentially an emerging suite of marketing technologies. Propaganda and marketing are kissing cousins. Marketing technologies consisting of military-grade psychological warfare tactics and strategies, otherwise known as PSYWAR. Surveillance capitalism provides the economic model, logic, extracted data, and value that fuel and guide modern psychological warfare deployment. And of course, surveillance capitalism is the business model of Google, Facebook, Amazon, and all the other social media pretty much all around you. I'm deeply troubled by the many observable interactions between modern psychological warfare technologies, tactics, and strategies, and the observations and predictions of Hannah Arendt and Matthias Desmet concerning the psychology of totalitarianism, and of course that socket with surveillance capitalism. I fear the further development of feedback loops between these fundamental social, political, and economic forces. I sense that these feedback loops will enable and drive human society towards the dark, collectivist, and globalist transhuman future with which the World Economic Forum seems so enthralled. By deploying PSYWAR capabilities on top of these other business models, which are being expanded and enhanced by the predictive futures products of surveillance capitalism, humanity will be driven towards a new surrealistic reality in which feelings, beliefs, morality, and behavior will all be a synthetic product, in which wealth accumulation will become the exclusive right of a small controlling elite who no longer recognize the existence of their own souls, but rather exist at the interface of man and machine and seek to give birth to a new species of man-machine fusion. This is the essence of transhumanism, okay? And many of these folks that are in this transhuman space and advocating for it here at ground zero are of the mind that really the human species has had its time. We're obsolete. We need to be replaced. We're not being good stewards, okay? Our time is up. It's time for a new species. The new species we're calling transhumans. The fusion of man and machine, all facilitated by artificial intelligence. So what do I mean by psychological bioterrorism? PSYWAR is when psychological operations methods are used by governments against a foreign population or even against the citizens of a government in a coordinated fashion. That's PSYWAR. NATO has a whole policy about it. They call it hybrid warfare. It's considered the future of warfare because you don't have to use kinetic weapons, or they're a last resort. You can overturn governments routinely using psychological warfare methods. This is what happened in Arab Spring. Arab Spring was the proof of concept for the CIA's ability to deploy Facebook, Twitter, and all the social media platforms. And what you think of as social media, unless you're in the industry, you're only scratching the surface. It is deep. Psychological bioterrorism is something different. It's the use of fear about a disease to manipulate individuals or populations by governments and other organizations, such as Big Pharma. Although the fear of infectious disease is an obvious example, it's not the only way psychological bioterrorism is used. Other examples include propaganda regarding environmental toxins, unsafe drinking water, soil contamination, climate change risks. I could go on and on. Another name for psychological bioterrorism is information bioterrorism. I didn't come up with these terms. Well, I came up with psychological bioterrorism, which I think is the best way to capture this. Information bioterrorism was first discussed in my realm of awareness in January 2017. Okay, so this is right after the last bird flu episode. I can't call it an epidemic. An interview with the journal Current Concerns of New Zealand by Dr. Alexander Kosmanov, a former Soviet Russian, so he bridged, Foreign Intelligence Service, SVR intelligence officer, who in this interview described the operational fundamentals of spy tradecraft, which he called information bioterrorism, and I call psychological bioterrorism. He was just describing this is what we do. Very matter of fact. Kosmanov described how the existence and deployment of an active psychological bioterror operation can be detected as a scripted series of active operational deployment stages, each involving well-defined strategies, actors, roles, and responsibilities. When I read this 2017 interview, it rocked my world because he laid out a punch list. And as I compared that to what we've experienced over the last 4 years, it was book, chapter, and verse. Bang, 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 bang. And after reading that, I have to conclude we've been had. Okay? The approach used to carry out an active psychological bioterror operation is based on a crafted strategy. First, messaging about the problem, and then deployment of its solution. Okay? You're seeing this play out. You've been seeing it play out with bird flu now. Okay? There are still no examples of repeated human-to-human transmission of bird flu. Bird flu has been circulating in Europe longer than it has in the United States. This particular isolate has been circulating in the United States since 2022. There are no major hospitalizations and no deaths associated with the current strain of bird flu that we've all had fear promoted about. Okay? This is pure hype. Okay? And I await any evidence otherwise, and I'll be glad to change my position. But right now, there is no evidence that this represents a major public health event. The main stages of the active operation through which the psychological bioterror event can be created are as follows. Phase one, this is language that's used in the intelligence community. The executor, ergo the intelligence service, with the help of supporters, ergo agents, and auxiliary means, mass media, throw out false information. In one example, an imminent pandemic of bird flu. Remember, he's speaking in 2017. Of the bird flu event that just occurred. He doesn't have a crystal ball looking into the future. He's just describing what he's just seen. We just happen to be seeing it play again. In one example, an imminent pandemic of bird flu onto the target audience. You're the target audience with a pretense that it's real. That is exactly what's been happening. That's exactly what happened with COVID. Phase two. Executors, supporters, and auxiliary means accelerate the problem, making it a hot topic. Maximum interest needs to be created. Once the false problem is created, it grows like a snowball, rolling and rolling, independently building size as if it's becoming a legitimate concern. All you got to do is watch CNN or any of the major media outlets. This is their business model. Remember, if it bleeds, it leads. There's nothing better for CNN. Well, maybe Donald Trump is better for CNN, but this fear, this promoted fear of death, that's what it is. They're frightening you with the most fundamental fear they can, which is the fear of death. It goes straight into your lizard brain. Okay? It goes right past your conscious mind. The fear of death is incredibly powerful and incredibly effective. In phase three, the operation's actual objective is realized secretly. Monetary gains are obtained, government stability is undermined, if that's the goal, with economic loss, and any other planned impacts are achieved. As phase three is achieved, the target, you, the general population, is told that the problem is being solved and the risks are contained. This is done with sideline information, news, stories, social media posts, interviews. However, ideally, remember, he's speaking in 2017. Ideally, the problem is left hanging so that the executor can use it again. Ideally, having successfully created, crafted, inserted, and amplified the fear narrative, The general sense of fear and anxiety about the risks of the psychological bioterror threat agent, in this example avian flu or bird flu, should be maintained at a low level so that it's easy to resurrect for future use. Okay, that's exactly what's happened. What makes, and now we have Fauci going on major media, like the other day with CNN, talking about how, I've been jabbed 6 times, but now I've had another case of COVID. Poor me. Did it look like Fauci was suffering? No. What makes psychological bioterrorism effective? This is all coming from the Kozmov, talking in 2017 about standard intelligence community practices. What makes it effective? He says, a time factor. Psychological bioterrorism provides a practical method for immediate global transmission and development of widespread panic through electronic means of communication. Number 2, a vulnerability factor. People feel helplessness when confronting the threat due to the lack of effective means of defense. Remember that? We were all helpless, okay, and told to shut up and go into our little holes, not talk to each other. This creates panic among the general population, which can then be directed or exploited to support other objectives. This feeds right into Matthias Desmet's theory about mass formation and the psychological basis of totalitarianism. 3, an uncertainty factor. A lack of factual information about the sources of the bioterror threat and its spread creates an opportunity to manipulate the masses of people who initiate the threat. Initiating and promoting a psychological bioterror event creates an opportunity to craft and promote this to support other typically hidden objectives. In the case of the current bird flu narrative, and now, by the way, it's monkeypox 2.0, right? These objectives may include promoting the acceptance of mRNA-based genetic vaccine of dairy cattle, right? The one thing that they were told they couldn't use RNA vaccines for was milk-producing dairy cattle, because we know from the human data that these particles will be shed in breast milk, okay? And so the one thing that they're promoting here, and they don't have any data as to whether or not this has happened in the past, it's just they've just recently started testing cattle, is, oh my God, the milk is contaminated. How many times have you heard that now, okay? Don't drink milk, you might get bird flu, which would amount to getting conjunctivitis if you got it, and hardly anybody has had it. Promoting the objective of culling cattle herds to mitigate the claimed effects of cattle on CO2 emissions. It's just too weird that we have all of these agendas all converging on this same point. 4th, a lack of control factor. Every person who accepts the promoted bioterror narrative develops and internalizes a sense of being out of control. Remember that? Remember that feeling? Because he or she is a suspicious object. This is really effective. Liable to have the disease, and therefore is a threat to everyone else. I remember when I was infected by SARS-CoV-2 in February of 2020, you know what I felt? I felt shame. Shame. How did I let this happen to me? It just so happens I was staying in a hotel right across from the biotech company where the Boston outbreak started. It wasn't my fault. But I felt shame because I had this. I was really hesitant to even admit on social media that I'd been infected. It was like a black mark. This creates internal chronic anxiety in those vulnerable to the bioterror campaign, and this fear is easily manipulated by the promotion of narratives requiring compliance with a series of actions. Okay? The fear and the shame are mitigated by giving you the things that you have to do, the rituals you have to engage in order to release this tension that serve to create a sense of purpose, identity, and belonging to an in-group. I mean, this guy could have been like Matthias Desmet's best friend. The interface between what he's describing as the goals and objectives and strategies being deployed by the intelligence community all over the world in these kinds of events just perfectly dovetail with the things that Matthias was talking about when he was describing the mass formation phenomena. These create a sense of purpose, identity, and belonging to an in-group that has achieved protected status from the manufactured bioterror event by performing a ritual or modifying their behavior in some way. Now, does that capture what we've been through over the last 4 years? When I read this, I was blown away. Okay, because he perfectly described as if he had a crystal ball looking into the future, exactly what we've been through on a massive scale. Who deploys psychological bioterrorism? Large-scale psychological bioterrorism, or information bioterrorism, or informational biologic blackmail is another term he used, is usually secretly deployed by foreign or domestic intelligence or security services and implemented as an active operation, quote-unquote, in target countries using a variety of witting or unwitting allies. However, this strategy is also deployed to augment pharmaceutical industry business objectives. Okay, now I'm going to transition to the next one. Nation states and psychological warfare. Regarding COVID crisis, medical freedom and freedom in general, the government's willingness to deploy modern, this is one of the most important insights I think I've had over the last 4 years. And it really is right at the core of the Liberty Forum mission and intellectual space. The government's willingness to deploy modern cognitive and psychological warfare tools and technologies against their own citizenry, in combination with the collusion and coercion using the power of modern big information technology, is an evil the world has never known before. We give our rights to the government in exchange for our government's commitment to providing security, furthering prosperity, and respecting the people's autonomy, sovereignty, and will. Over the last 4 years, many have come to learn that there's a suite of technologies and capabilities that have been developed over decades and can influence everything we think, feel, hear, and believe, can control all emotion, all information that you're able to have access to. Think about it. Think about how highly censored the web is now. They're memory holding all kinds of stuff. I mean, if you think that I'm blanking, the archive, the Internet Archive, is the Wayback Machine. Thank you very much, Jill. If you think that the Wayback Machine provides you an accurate picture of information and websites that have been on the web historically, that's false. The Wayback Machine actively censors under government pressure. Now, the good news is that all they do is they pull those websites off and they're still archived somewhere in some database. But you can't access it. Okay? The information that's on the web is being actively scrubbed in real time so that you can't see it. These technologies have been developed, deployed for offshore use, specifically to advance American interests through the U.S. State Department and Five Eye intelligence community interests, through the U.S. State Department, the intelligence community, and the Department of Defense. Historically, this suite of capabilities has been outwardly facing. This is generally also true for the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance. These nations have taken the position that it's acceptable to deploy propaganda and dirty tricks, like regime change, to achieve their foreign policy goals in a challenging world, so long as these tools aren't deployed against their own citizens. Or at least that's what we've been led to believe. Over the past 2 decades, the Internet's capabilities have become more sophisticated. Thus, these government agencies, along with cooperating non-governmental organizations and institutes, have adapted to become more adept at using non-kinetic psychological warfare to control foreign governments, their populations, and their election outcomes. As I said, Arab Spring is the case study. And then, as Mike Benz points out, along comes Brexit, Nigel Farage, who I consider a good friend, and Donald Trump. And suddenly, they realized they had a problem. The tools and technologies that they had developed to allow them to control offshore governments and to advance the interests of the U.S. State Department, because remember, if it wasn't us, this has to do with American exceptionalism, and this is kind of challenging, particularly for the U.S. audience. The logic has been that in the face of the threats offshore, Middle Eastern countries, China, of course, Russia, and their aggression, The U.S. is the good guys. And so if we don't do it, if we don't step into these other nation states, into these other political environments, then other bad guys will step in, and so therefore we must do it. And this has been the slippery slope. There's a number of these slippery slopes that we've walked down over the last few decades. And we've essentially convinced ourselves that we have to be the imperialists. Because if it isn't us, it's going to be Putin, it's going to be Xi, it's going to be the bad guys in the Middle East, et cetera, et cetera. And in so doing, we've compromised ourselves. We've run afoul of George Washington's advice to avoid foreign entanglements in his final speech. Okay? We've gone right down that pathway, and now we've built a whole infrastructure, industries, et cetera, around supporting that, and it's an unstoppable juggernaut. However, this is the kicker. When a government is willing to deploy modern psychological technologies, psychological warfare technologies, power against its citizenry, then the concepts of social contract, sovereignty, and personal autonomy becomes completely obsolete. That's where we're at right now. This is considered a necessary evil. It used to be it was forbidden. We were taking these, we'd built this tech, we were using it externally facing because the world is a bad place and we're the good guys. But now, in the face of the threat of the rise of populism, the rise of conservatives, these movements, this libertarian thrust that we're involved in. Personally, I felt more at home with the Mises Institute and the Austrian School of Economics the other day than I've felt just about anywhere in the world lately. This is a fundamental consequence of psy-war methods being deployed by a government against its own citizens. People think they're able to resist this modern propaganda. Okay, listen to this part. They think they're able to resist these modern propaganda tools and methods, but the data show that this is very difficult, and actually it's often the most educated that are the most susceptible. All of you that came out of Stanford or Berkeley or all these wonderful places, you and me with my stupid long postgraduate training, what we've all been told and taught is to assimilate very readily and regurgitate that which we're told. We've basically been trained to accept authoritarianism. It's the nature of teaching. It's the nature of the modern higher education experience. And so, of course, we accept and assimilate this. It goes right into our minds. The truth is that we're all susceptible to the power of modern psy-war and cognitive warfare technologies. Furthermore, it's been a decision made by consensus by certain elements of our government that it's acceptable to deploy these methods and technologies in order to avoid the disruptive effects of populist movements, which might otherwise result in major disruptions to current domestic and foreign affairs policies. If that doesn't capture the existential threat of Donald Trump, I don't know what does. Okay? And in the face of that existential threat, something has got to be done. For many years, the unwritten consensus of the U.S. government has been that as long as these PSYOPs capabilities remained outwardly directed, tool of foreign affairs and foreign influence, these strategies were acceptable statecraft. Advancing the imperial interests of the United States and associated corporations was deemed acceptable so long as it wasn't directed against American citizens. This consensus is now obsolete. It's gone. Again, if you want to understand what's coming at you, look at our friends north of the border in Canada under Trudeau, and look at what's happening right now in the UK under Starmer. Okay? We are just that far. We're one election away from that, my friends. And Mr. Walz, Governor Walz, made a clear, unequivocal statement the other day that freedom of expression doesn't necessarily apply to, basically, he's saying, ideas and beliefs that are different from mine. And we're the bastion. We are the last firewall standing between that reality, the reality that they're now experiencing in the UK, and where we are now. I'm stunned to even say this. Let's talk about surveillance capitalism. Okay, this gets right at the heart of Silicon Valley. Just out. Texas Attorney General Paxton is now filing a suit against General Motors for obtaining and selling data collected from customer autos since 2015. And here's his quote from this pending case. Companies are using invasive technology to violate the rights of our citizens in unthinkable ways. Millions of American drivers wanted to buy a car, not a comprehensive surveillance system that unlawfully records information about every drive they take and sells their data to any company willing to pay for it, not the least of which is your insurance agency. Okay? That's where we're at right now. That's just one embodied. We think about Google and Facebook and their associated corporations and Amazon. By the way, Amazon is the same business model. It's just vertically integrated. They're kind of just doing it better than the other guys. Surveillance capitalism is a novel economic system that emerged in the digital era, characterized by the unilateral claiming of private human experience as free raw material for translation into behavioral data. In this version of capitalism, it's never existed before, it was the thing that suddenly made Silicon Valley explode financially. Surveillance capitalism is what pays for all this infrastructure all around you right now. In this version of capitalism, the prediction and influencing of behavior, political and economic, rather than the production of goods and services, is the primary product. This economic logic prioritizes the extraction, processing, and trading of personal data to predict and influence human behavior by exploiting those predictions for a variety of economic or marketing and political objectives. Cambridge Analytica was a shot across the bow. Now we're full on. The data are that Google, through its pop-up AdSense kind of nudges that are customized for individuals, can swing non-committed voters by at least 20 points. Okay? And that's been repeatedly validated. Epstein is the leader of that group. Key features of surveillance capitalism include the following. One-way mirroring operations. Surveillance capitalists engineer operations to operate in secrecy, hiding their methods and intentions from users, you, who are unaware of the extent of data collection and analysis. Instrumentation power. Surveillance capitalists wield power through the design of systems that cultivate radical indifference, rendering users oblivious to their observations and manipulations. Behavioral futures markets. This is how the product that is being extracted from you, without your awareness, without your approval, is being recrafted into a final marketable entity and then repeatedly resold. It's being resold as behavioral futures. Behavioral future market. The extracted data is traded in new markets, enabling companies to bet on users' future behavior, generating immense wealth for surveillance capitalists. Coordination with the state. Surveillance capitalism also often involves partnerships with governments, leveraging favorable laws, policing, and information sharing to entrench its power further. You guys all know that Google is the product of CIA capital, investment. You know that this whole business model that supports this region is basically fueled in very large part by the intelligence community and the U.S. government. Now it's set free. It's got a revenue model that is taking over the world. But remember what I said at the outset. There's a do loop now for those coders that is linking surveillance capitalism and its behavioral futures markets with psychological warfare technology that then influences those behaviors and those markets. You follow what I'm saying? It's a really, really powerful loop, and that's what's driving us into a place where nothing, this is truly surrealist. This is what's behind this world in which Truth is entirely plastic and fluid. It's whatever you say it is, because they can make it be whatever they want it to be, because they are basically extracting a fragment of your soul and processing it, repackaging it, and then using it as an input vector for these tools that then come back around and influence how you act by controlling everything around you, by controlling all sources of information. Surveillance capitalism is a business model based on the unilateral claim of human private experiences as free raw material for translation into behavioral data. These personal data are then extracted, processed, and traded to predict and influence human behavior in the future. Specific data concerning individuals is the commodity. In this version of capitalism, the prediction and influencing of behavior rather than the production of goods and services is the primary product. Okay, I'm just going to jump ahead. Everybody here saw The Matrix. You might have kind of gotten tired after Matrix 2, 3, or 4, but you understand the concept of humans being farmed for energy by machines. Now that's a contrivance, it's a metaphor. But the truth is that it's the extraction, unwilling extraction of part of your soul, what makes you you, by tech that is fueling this entire engine, which is fueling the profit model. Okay? And this is theft. That is what Paxton is getting at. That's why I love that new information about what he's doing with what he's trying to bring in this lawsuit against GM. He's essentially saying, you as consumers, when you bought this car, you didn't know that you were buying a package that was going to do surveillance on you that was then going to get repackaged and sold. You weren't part of that bargain. This was unwilling. This is theft. It's theft of a fundamental aspect of what makes you who you are. Now, I've been introduced to this new idea. It's got a word associated with it, and it kind of causes a lot of people to step back and say, I don't know, that's pretty weird. I don't know that I can buy into that. The term is anarcho-capitalism. The term was coined by this guy, Murray Rothbard, who was profoundly mistrustful of the state. And if anybody wants to understand more about this, what I think is one of the most fascinating areas intellectually that I've encountered in the last decade, anarcho-capitalism, you might want to read this book that you can get free from the Mises Institute called The Anatomy of the State. And then follow that one up by What Did the Government Do with My Money? Okay? If you read those two, you got it in short form. They're short little monographs, and you don't have to read the great big thick Murray Rothbard text. In The Anatomy of the State, Rothbard argues there are two means for producing wealth. He builds up the whole stack of the nature of the state and our current system from first concepts. Two means of producing wealth. Economic means refers to producing and exchanging goods and services through voluntary human effort, creativity, and entrepreneurship, what we all think of as how wealth is generated. Economic means are additive, generating wealth for all parties involved. Political means refers to using force or coercion to seize wealth from others. Political means are reductive, distorting incentives and undermining long-term prosperity, something that I think we all kind of endorse, long-term prosperity. For example, under Rothbard's thesis, taxation is a form of theft, in which political means are used to seize wealth from others. By the way, another form of theft is inflation. I assert surveillance capitalism is a political means of theft, in which accumulated personal wealth in the form of fundamental, personal, and proprietary aspects of your soul are forcefully extracted and commodified without your permission. Surveillance capitalism is the basic business model, as I said, pursued by Amazon, Google, and Facebook. You remember when everybody was wondering, how are they going to monetize the internet? What is the business model? Okay, The business model that came out of those discussions, brilliant, grossly unethical, is surveillance capitalism. As well as the entire mercenary censorship industrial complex, the fact-checker industry, the wide range of non-governmental cutout organizations which act on behalf of a variety of governmental, NGO, and corporate organizations. Their business model is integrally involved with surveillance capitalism. In a sense, corporate media also practice a form of surveillance capitalism when they engage in slander and defamation to advance political objectives and perspectives by intentionally and maliciously damaging reputations. You know, if you want to see an example of that, you know, not to personalize it, look at what happened to Nicole Shanahan, a member of your community. Okay, look what they did to her as soon as she announced that together with Bobby, she was going to run for vice president. Okay, and they just destroyed her. Article after article. And what do? This gains political objectives and it generates capital. It generates revenue for big media. Okay, they took her reputation and tore it to shreds as a way to make profit. This business model extends down to social media trolls who build audiences, clicks, and followers by publishing salacious and unfounded rumors, speculation, and accusations. The business model has more to do with the metaphor of the Matrix, as I said, than anything else. The concept of humans as batteries is a metaphorical representation of their enslavement and exploitation by the machines. This is the socket that leads to transhumanism. That's what I'm talking about. It's almost inevitable. This is driving us towards this dark future that Yuval Harari and the WEF seem to gleefully support. In the surveillance capital business model, you're enticed and cultivated to obsessively participate in the platform. You become an addict intentionally. And then your thoughts, emotions, feelings, and beliefs are harvested from all available sources, including platform-based interactions. The other day I learned there's a little button you can click on Twitter that will determine whether or not Twitter is allowed to access all other open tabs in your browser and extract information from that. Okay? That's how this is working. They're not just gathering information about what you're doing on X. They're gathering information, or Facebook or whatever. They're gathering a universe of information about what your global interactions are on the web, and then they're commodifying that and marketing it. The extracted value of these items are then algorithmically processed to yield predictive individual and collective futures. Theft by commodification is practiced by machines acting on behalf of a small subset of humanity to extract or seize value, wealth, from other human beings without their permission. Under Rothbard's logical formulation, this is fundamentally a political rather than an economic transaction. Once reformulated, packaged, and marketed, the value generates wealth for the surveillance capitalist by removing and thereby diminishing the personal wealth of you, who is typically and unintentionally uninformed of the loss. That's those disclaimers and all those statements. Those are intentionally tiny print and Byzantine. So every time they say, oh, you have to click on this new criteria, you have to accept these new terms and conditions, and they write it in a way that you look at it and you look, God, I don't have half an hour to read through that and think about it. I just click because I want to do this thing, okay? They got you. Okay, that's intentional. That's strategic. In the case of Facebook and Google versus versions of the surveillance capitalism model, behavioral and emotional futures are repeatedly auctioned off to third parties who use the information for a variety of economic and political purposes. It's repeatedly resold. I mentioned Amazon uses the same model, but they're just vertically integrated and they're extracting that information, then using it to predict what you want to buy and pushing you objects that they think you will buy. Under the surveillance capitalism business model, you're not the product, but rather your thoughts, emotions, beliefs, and knowledge are the natural resources being mined. This goes way beyond anything that Rothbard thought about. This goes way beyond what Matthias has been thinking about, let alone Hannah Arendt. This is new. And this, I don't know if this is the banality of evil or it's just flat out evil. Some people that I talk to that are active in your community, that are out on the front edge, dealing with people in the AI space and in the transhuman space, suggest that some of these folks that are advocating for this and developing these platforms, perhaps even including the founders of Google, are intrinsically evil. They're surrounding themselves with evil people. They've lost perspective and connectivity with the human community. They're not part of us anymore. A friend of mine, Jack Posovic, wrote a book recently titled Unhumans. And I was asked by the publisher to write a review of that, and I was really uncomfortable because I know as soon as we label another human being as not human, it allows us psychologically to do all kinds of evil things. And so I'm really uncomfortable with this, but there's something fundamental going on here. And right here in Silicon Valley is kind of ground zero for it. I spoke about commodification. Commodification transforms inalienable, free, or gifted things, objects, services, ideas, nature, personal information, people, or animals, into commodities or objects for sales. It means losing an inherent quality of social relationship which something is integrated when something like this is integrated into a capitalist marketplace. Concepts that have been argued as being commodified include broad items such as your body, intimacy, public goods, animals, and holidays have all been commodified, and that's what's happening. The commodification of these fundamental characteristics of what make us humans and what makes us a community. There are many adjacencies, corollaries, and derivatives associated with the fundamentals of surveillance capitalism. Take a moment to consider the interface between surveillance capitalism business model and the censorship industrial complex. Or surveillance capitalism in politics, with Cambridge Analytica being an early example. Or surveillance capitalism in the biodefense industrial complex business, what we've just been talking about above. Or surveillance capitalism in transhumanism, or 1,000 others. This is truly disruptive, transformational. It's not even calling it a technology, it's a business model. It's something beyond that. And it's incredibly profitable and incredibly powerful. And we've never seen anything like it before in the history of the human race.
Provide a solution, please.
So the best solution is vote and get active and stand up against this. Speak out. Don't be afraid. And in the meantime, prepare. I mean, this is going to be a long... Elon Musk is now using the term war. We're in for it. Remember all those crazy people we used to call preppers? Suddenly they're prophetic. I don't know. When I look at my friends in the UK, I'm fearful of what's coming at us and how close it is and how rapidly it can be deployed. Close with a quote. Aldous Huxley, 1962. By means of ever more effective methods of mind manipulation, the democracies will change their nature. The quaint old forms, elections, parliaments, supreme courts, and all the rest will remain. The underlying substance will be a new kind of totalitarianism. All the traditional names, all the hallowed slogans will remain exactly like they were in the good old days. Democracy and freedom will be the theme of every broadcast and editorial. Meanwhile, the ruling oligarchy with its highly trained elite will quietly run the show as they see fit. And finally, attributed to Alexander Solzhenitsyn, we know they're lying. They know that they're lying. They even know that we know they're lying. We also know that they know that we know that they're lying too. They, of course, know that we certainly know. They know, we know, they're lying too as well. But still they're lying. And here's the kicker. In our country, the lie has become not just a moral category, but the pillar industry of the country. Okay? That was the old USSR. Does that apply here yet? I kind of sense that maybe it does. And as I said, you all are the thin blue line. You are what separates us from that future. And it's thin, and we're aging. And we somehow got to reach the persuadable middle, the young. I'm glad to see there are a few young faces in the audience. That's often not the case. One of the things I loved about going to the Mises Institute. But it's kind of up to us. So I hope this little journey through my mind and Jill's mind over the last 4 years has been helpful. And as Andrew Bridgens said in his little promo to our book that he just sent me, this is not a book. It's essential armor for your mind as we're headed into these dark times. My hope, I hope it's not naive, is that by sharing these ideas and these observations, I help you to be better prepared to resist this that's coming at us right now, to recognize it. And it's a hope born of knowing that all of us that have grown up since mid-century, which I'm afraid is most of us here, we've all become pretty immune to modern marketing technology. It's harder to sell us soap than it was in the 60s. This is kind of the same thing. And I believe, it's an article of faith, that if you can understand what is being deployed against you, you will be a lot better prepared to resist it and to help those around you, not even to mention your children, to be better prepared so that they can resist it and remain free. Free to think, free to speak. It's that simple. Thanks for your time.
First question is the First Amendment really not the last barrier to totalitarianism, Robert?
Well,
And you could...
the First and Second Amendment clearly are being under assault. And there's all kinds of justification being built around them that they're disposable, they're really no longer useful in modern society. Well, quite, as Jill said. They've created a new language, mis, dis, and malinformation, and then defined those things as outside of the right to free speech. And this has become normalized. It's really been normalized all across the West, not just the United States. So are they really a barrier? When government no longer feels constrained by law or the Constitution, which I argue is the case with the current administration, then all of these concepts become disposable. I hope I've answered your question, Jane.
I think you did. Question from the audience. What are your thoughts on Elon Musk's Neuralink in light of transhumanism? And I will share with you that we had Jack here, and we hope to have him back. He was a little creeped out, frankly, by Silicon Valley. He found it a little cold. Not us, but...
Yeah. I think Elon Musk is a complex person. He's clearly a business person. He's clearly engaged with the government in a variety of contracting activities, including Neuralink. Neuralink is profoundly threatening. It's kind of a gateway drug to transhumanism. I can't get inside of Elon's brain. He does seem like so many, like Nicole, when I did a podcast with her, I found it fascinating. She's on a journey of discovery and awakening. And I think Elon is too. If you look at what he's been posting on Twitter lately about his son and so many other things, I don't know that where he was at 2 years ago or 3 years ago with Neuralink really is a good representation of where he's at now. But the tech has been presented to us as benign. Who wouldn't want veterans who are damaged to be able to recover function? That's how it's being sold to us. And like a lot of things, the underlying truth is a lot more threatening.
Okay. Why do you think that Peter Daszak and Ralph Baric have not been arrested?
Okay. Baric, I think, basically copped a plea, sort of, by outing Daszak. If you heard Fauci's recent comments on Fox News about Donald Trump, in which he expresses that he doesn't think Trump is going to come after him, I commented about that on War Room today. Jill had the brainstorm as she was listening to that quote that it's a kind of a backwards endorsement of Donald Trump by Fauci, because he's saying Donald Trump isn't going to deploy lawfare to fight the old battles in the same way that the Democrats have deployed lawfare. I mean, among the conservatives that I deal with that are very linked into D.C. and CPAC and all that, they're stunned by the way that the law has been weaponized against conservatives. And it seems that Fauci is saying that he knows Trump and he doesn't think he's going to do that. Daszak has lost his ability to receive federal funding. He basically has been shamed. He is not a U.S. citizen, so he'd have to be deported. In a world in which Navarro and Bannon are jailed, or John Strand, for, in their cases, refusing to provide weapons to be used against their former boss, Donald Trump, and so that's punishable by 4 months, or as Peter was saying today on Bannon, they've been jailed for the crime of patriotism. It's hard. It seems that we're going to allow misbehavior. It's a two-tier justice system, just like they're showing is happening in the UK right now, based on politics. And so it's hard for me to imagine how Baric, Daszak, Fauci, the underlings that have lied to Congress in the testimony are going to be held accountable. I just don't think it's going to happen. Just like the people responsible for Abu Ghraib were never held accountable. The Iraq War, torture. So I don't know what to say. It's a two-tier justice system, and I don't think it's going to happen.
Do you want to say something about the discontinuance of GARM?
Right. So I've written about this. I think we're into the third Substack essay now on that one, really picking it apart. The Global Alliance for Responsible Media was set up by, what's it called? The World Federation of Advertisers, right? WFA. But it's really the World Economic Forum that's behind GARM. And GARM is what was weaponized against me. It was actually Coca-Cola went to GARM to complain because I was on Joe Rogan and tried to get Spotify deplatformed from any advertising because of what I said on Joe Rogan. Now, if you followed that, God bless you. But it's GARM GARM is essentially a trade union organization like the Trusted News Initiative that's being used to algorithmically implement advertiser boycotts. I mean, remember back in the old days, we would say, oh, I really don't like Target selling transhuman clothing for newborns. Transgender, pardon me.
That's
and
coming
so
up
we're
next,
all going to
though.
boycott. We're all going to boycott Target. Okay, with GARM and Google AdSense, because those two are linked. So GARM kind of provides the input for the things. GARM provides the input, and they have cutout organizations that feed them with information about who should be censored, what platforms, what information should be censored. And a lot of those have been shown to basically just be a bunch of woke folks spouting out their opinion about what should be censored. That feeds up into GARM. Then GARM feeds into AdSense, and AdSense functionally controls all advertising in the internet. And so it's an algorithmic process starting with these small organizations that are often very woke, that are deciding what should be allowed speech, that then is resulting in kind of a globalized algorithmic censorship. And GARM decided that Twitter, basically, Twitter's bad. And it needs to be deplatformed from advertising, and Twitter lost over half its revenue, like a light switch got thrown. And that's the origin of the lawsuit against GARM that was filed by Yacarino with Elon as chairman, that then within 2 days resulted in GARM being shut down by the World Federation of Advertisers. And our prediction is there's just going to be another pop-up cutout organization that's GARM-like that's going to come up in the future, but they're trying to avoid the lawsuit. But to the credit of Dillon Law Group, local firm, Musk and Yacarino didn't just target GARM, they targeted a bunch of the associated corporations and the WFA. So we'll see how all that plays out. But that's this new war that's going on. And then the next skirmish was this new digital act that's been implemented in the European Union that they first deployed against Twitter and Elon, and are asserting that Twitter needs to censor all information that's mis, dis, mal, or otherwise designated from any European audiences, that resulted in this dust-up just yesterday, and the denial of service attack against X to shut down the interview between Elon and Trump. I mean, we're watching this play out in real time. Yeah. Yeah. It's fascinating. And I got to just say, I'm sorry to be so economically driven, but it completely validates her book. I'm watching this play out, I'm like, oh my God, you know, I couldn't have a better marketing strategy if I wanted. It's in the press on a daily basis. And we're seeing it play out with, the pivot that occurred with Kamala is just stunning. The marketing and psychological manipulation technology that is being deployed there, and watching the population respond to it.
It's downright joyful, isn't it?
It's stunning. It's just stunning.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead.
I'm going to consolidate some of your questions because people have a lot of interest in the same thing. So one of our audience members asks, as AI learns about hypnosis techniques, will the populace have a chance? And that kind of...
You already know my answer to that.
Okay, and that's kind of combine that with, you know, what is left of voluntary human effort? Does that have meaning anymore?
My point. Thank you, Jane.
Sure.
Exactly my point. Okay? This is deeply threatening to what makes us human, as far as I'm concerned. And I referred to this algorithmic kind of do loop, where it's self-reinforcing and coming back. It's a feedback loop. And it's driving us into a place where you're familiar with the artwork again, I'm blanking, the artist, surrealistic artist. Salvador Dali, yeah. Okay, the best metaphor I have, visual metaphor, is Dali's image of the melting clocks. Okay, that's modern reality. Everything is plastic and fluid and controlled, and it's increasingly going to be controlled by AI through these processes. And that's why I use these terms. It's extracting value without your permission from your soul. It's tearing a part of your soul away and commodifying it and marketing it. And I don't know how we stop this. There's never been anything like this in the past. And that's I think, as I try to think about the transhuman imaginations of Yuval Harari, that man is now God, and that God is obsolete. We no longer need God, and we're basically just birthing a new species that is going to become our masters, and that's all a good thing. This is the pathway to that evil, I think. It's the one that seems most clear to me.
It's sort of amazing. Everybody has these things in their home. I mean, part of it, people justify this.
Oh.
Right? They have
Talk about
Alexa,
surveillance
right.
capitalism.
Alexa,
We
come
invite it
my
into
house.
our homes. It's in our bloody refrigerators.
Yeah. And people say, "Oh, I don't care." Well,
Yeah.
you better care, right? So
Or not.
we're-
Or
I think-
just go along with it and just become, what are we going to call it? Subhuman? Yeah,
I think
slaves.
I think it's slaves.
Indentured servitude.
I think it's going to be death by convenience.
So there's this long-standing tension between Orwell and Huxley. Orwell envisioned this dark totalitarian dictatorship coming over us. Huxley thought we were going to fall into the new totalitarian world basically through convenience. We're going to accept it willingly. We're going to want it. That's his version of where this was going to go, based, as I mentioned, in the 60s when he was thinking about this, 50s and 60s. So, brilliant insight.
Robert, was there a point in history when we became a commodity? And is there any way we can become less of a commodity? Do you have a moment in time?
In the book, Jill gets credit for this. She makes the case that the pivot moment was the coup, the assassination of the president, when our government and our allies, NATO, Five Eyes, kind of had moved down the slippery slope to the point where they convinced themselves that it was acceptable to manipulate people psychologically on a mass basis, including their own citizens. And we've been living in a post-truth world ever since. But then if you look back historically, a case can be made, we go back to the robber barons, we go back to Jekyll Island. For me, and I think probably for you and a lot of us, the good news about the COVID crisis is it's allowed us to break free of a lot of the constraints that were around us and to see things. And now we're in this world in which our eyes are open now, and it's getting harder and harder to believe any of the reality around us. And we reach back in time. There's a whole case being made that Watergate was basically a CIA operation. I never thought I would think that. I was with a very high status, responsible, wealthy person that I'm not going to give more characterization. that we were talking about things that we thought were true that now we can no longer rely on. And I said, and we were just throwing in examples to try to trigger each other. And I said, moonshot. And he said, well, actually, he's come to the point where he thinks there's merit to whether the possibility that the moonshot could have been fabricated. And the fundamental thing that he was citing was the overall energy expended, in theory, to place the astronauts on the moon doesn't jive with what is calculated as necessary in order to achieve it. In other words, we didn't put enough juice in the rocket to do what we said happened. It's like the underpinnings of what we believed to be reality have just been torn asunder. And we're left in this free-floating environment of having to question everything. That's all I can say about that. I don't know how far back it goes.
Would you speak to the role of forces outside of the United States? A couple questions about NATO and the British intelligence and how involved they are with all of this.
British intelligence is deeply involved. British intelligence and the British intellectual community has given rise to a lot of this tech. Nudge technology is just one example. Nudge goes all the way from the public service messaging to get us to stop smoking to now everything around us. We're all being nudged in every direction to be more woke, more inclusive, whatever the social engineering is that needs to be deployed. Pardon? Yeah, climate change is one example. That serve various agendas. The reason I was talking to Andrew Bridgen today, in addition to trying to extract a little quote for the back of the book cover, he was targeted by what's called the 77th Brigade, which is a branch of the British military. And the 77th Brigade has created an informal socket interface with people that basically do trollery online for money for the British Army. And I've experienced it when I go to the UK to speak on behalf of Andrew or Nigel. I get inundated with social media attacks from the 77th Brigade and the Mutton Crew. They are all over this. And the suite of technologies that the UK has developed and deployed includes stuff, denial of service attacks is just routine. They can easily manipulate polling data, all kinds of things that we use as the basis for what we believe to be true are being readily and repeatedly and actively weaponized and manipulated. And a lot of that tech comes out of the UK. The manipulations of Wikipedia, my own entries, this is why my personal experience has been kind of a window into this for me to understand it. The weaponization of my CV on Wikipedia was driven by a sock puppet that literally would edit on Wiki 7 days a week, like 20 hours a day, and has been traced back to MI6. Okay? Y'all know you can't rely on anything in Wikipedia now. It's all weaponized. It's all manipulated. And a lot of that's being driven by the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, and at the core of that Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance is the alliance between U.S. intelligence and British intelligence. And the way that works is that to the extent, and we all think that there's some constraints in the U.S. intelligence community deploying stuff against U.S. citizens, it turns out that that's really soft and squishy. All the president has to do is basically say, hey, go do this, and they'll do it. There aren't any real legal constraints. But still, there's kind of an informal agreement that the CIA and the extended intelligence NSA community doesn't actively deploy stuff against the U.S. citizens unless they get the FISA court to agree. But in the UK intelligence community can do that against U.S. citizens and vice versa. And by the way, they all share intelligence anyhow, so it's kind of moot. And so there's these reciprocal arrangements, relationships, particularly among the Five Eyes Alliance, that basically allows them to do whatever they want to do in terms of intelligence gathering and manipulation and deployment of psychological warfare and all that good stuff that I was just talking about. So yeah, and by the way, there's been an agreement all the way through this between the U.S. and the U.K., particularly in the intelligence communities, that there will be suppression of information about COVID and about vaccine harms and all those kind of things. That's a formal agreement, that information would be suppressed. So when you're racking your brain, how come they won't admit to this? Well, they got an agreement that they're not going to do it, that they're going to suppress the information.
You brought it up, so I'm going to follow up on this, if you wouldn't mind. We were kind of steering away from the medical tonight, but there are some questions up here. One of them is about shedding. Do you want to? Could you say anything about that?
Number one, I find the shedding issue challenging because the data don't exist. The data don't exist because nobody wants them collected, and they don't want to capitalize the studies that should be done. We absolutely know that the particles are shed in breast milk. That's not debatable now. We absolutely know, as Jill always laughs at me for saying this because the pathologist comes out, anatomically the glands of the breast and the glands, your sweat glands, have a common precursor. They're basically the same structure, just modified for different purposes. And oh, by the way, the reason why the bird flu infects cows in milk cows is because it's infecting the lining of the mammary glands. So shedding happens. It's reasonable that shedding is happening through exosomes and maybe respirational. Is it happening at a level? I think we have to kind of separate shedding of the lipid nanocomplexes, which does occur, probably occurs in a variety of body fluids, probably including, let's say, reproductive fluids, from shedding of spike protein, because we know that the levels of spike protein that are produced in the body from the vaccine products, including the adenovirus products, are higher than the levels of spike protein present when you're infected. They have a totally different kinetic profile. They are produced for a much longer period of time at higher levels and throughout your body, whereas when you're infected by the virus, it tends to be more coming from your oropharyngeal and upper respiratory tract, so more localized. So there's this variety of observations, and I have to say they're anecdotal observations because nobody has been willing or capitalizing the systematic collection of all this information and these reports that women have been sharing since the very outset of the jab about effects on menstrual cycle, effects on menstrual cycle of unvaccinated women in groups. All I can say is there's a whole lot of smoke around this, and it would be lovely if somebody had the money. If Steve Kirsch suddenly said, "Oh, Robert, I want to spend $10 million to get at the bottom of this," we could solve it.
We'll let him know.
But until Steve decides, and I think it's even kind of beyond Steve's capitalization profile right now. But if Elon wanted to solve it, it could be solved in a few months. But until then, it's just speculation and hypothesis.
Okay. So I'm going to couple these two questions together. And one is, would you accept a job with the CDC or the FDA to straighten them out? And the other one is, if Kamala Harris wins, are you staying here in the U.S.?
Right. So let's take the second one first.
All right.
Jill and I talk about this. We were going to retire to Portugal, and then Portugal went totally totalitarian during the COVID crisis, and they're deeply socialist. The current Director General of the United Nations is the former head of the Socialist Party in Portugal, just to tie that up. And since we're traveling all over the world, we're constantly debating, well, where would we go? And I don't think there's any refuge. I think we got to make our stand here. And so that's why we focus on trying to build our own little paradise and build our own community where we live, which is in this interesting part of Virginia up against the Shenandoah National Park. But that's our choice. I don't think we would, although I am intrigued by Italy, but there's this problem with the mafia. You laugh. Okay, we have a friend, a former senator, that has been involved in supporting the health freedom movement and the COVID warriors. And she was removed. She didn't win re-election. And the story is that she made some accommodation with the local mafia, and then she didn't follow through on the things that they wanted her to do, and they murdered her boyfriend. Okay, so it happens, it's real. I don't know that there's another place to go. If you figure it out, let me know. But we kind of got to make a stand. In terms of what I serve, my position on this has been the same all the way through. And Jill and I have not endorsed anybody. I consider Bobby a friend. I think he's a noble soul. I think if he went to D.C., they would just eat him alive. He would be chopped liver. He's too good of a person to survive in that just nasty environment, in my opinion. That's why we live an hour and a half from Dulles, not in Northern Virginia. If I was asked to serve as an American, I would do my best to serve my country. Do I seek? Thank you. Do I seek to serve in the government in those kinds of positions, even if the truth is, we're surrounded by hardcore, influential conservatives, many of whom have served in the prior Trump administration. What they tell me is that Donald Trump is surrounding himself with the same cohort of people that served previously. And there's not a lot of oxygen for the likes of me in a place like that. But if I was asked, I would serve. I don't seek that. I'm 65 now. I value my marriage. I value my life. They're way more important to me than whatever status or opportunity or power might come from having some, frustratingly maddening position in the modern government that we've created around us. So that's my answer.
Okay. Robert, you've been accused of mass murder.
Yes.
This is not a normal...
10 different ways.
This is not a normal thing. This is an absolutely outrageous thing. And you're kind of hinting at it here, but I think it's important to ask you about what we can take away from how you and Jill have navigated this.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. I have seen marriage after marriage destroyed among colleagues in the medical freedom movement. I've seen people just torn apart, their associations, their communities. What we've been subjected to, and many others, I mentioned Nicole Shanahan, have been subjected to, is just wicked, and it's extremely psychologically stressful, I can tell you. I think that, as I reflect back, how come Jill and I have maintained our mental health under this kind of stress? I think having a stable, long-term, dyadic relationship has been super important, and being totally committed to it. And one of the key decisions we made early on was that we would insist on always traveling together. And I think that's been super important. I think that having somebody that you can lean on and help support you when one of the others, because sometimes she'll just get overwhelmed with anxiety over what she's seeing in threats. You know, we had the threat of a lawsuit kind of pop up the other day. And you know, the stress of realizing that everything that you've built could be taken away from you by somebody with more wealth and more lawyers in, you know, snap of the fingers is insanely stressful. And I was able to pull her back. Sometimes I get paranoid and mistrustful and get to the point where I just want to click away from everybody. And she gives me the strength to keep going. So I think dyadic relationships, long-term, stable, committed relationship has been super important. Being able to come back in one of the things I didn't talk about was the whole logic of physicals, virtuals, overlords, and machines. A lot of folks now live in a virtual space. We have chosen a life in which we get our hands dirty. We connect with the earth. We breed this horse. We run a small farm. We're engaged in an agricultural community. And I think that also helps keep us sane. The honest truth is that the support of folks like you, when sometimes the harassment and the attacks can get me really down. I'm susceptible to it. I shouldn't be. I should be stronger. But it gets to me. And then we'll go into an environment like this, or communities in Europe, and we're just surrounded and embraced with love. And when that happens, it's not an ego trip. It's just a relief. It's just like, oh, okay, I can keep going. I am reaching people. I am helping them, and they're helping me. They're helping us, and so I think those are the things.
That's really beautiful. So, in Robert's own words, each of us has a choice to make. Risk the ire of authorities at the administrative state. Live with the realization that they may be at your door at any time, and if they show up, they will have their way with you. Or shut up and lose a little bit of your soul. Robert, you've inspired us tonight to stand up. We are so grateful for the warning, for your incredible intellect, your integrity, generosity, for bringing all of that, and Jill, to the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley tonight. We are blessed and we are grateful, and thank you, thank you, thank you. Dr. Robert Malone.
Thank you for watching our presentation. Please like and subscribe to our channel to get updates on new speakers, and consider joining the Liberty Forum of Silicon Valley. You can do so at our website. If you don't want to join, but want to support the principles of American liberty, you can make a tax-deductible donation via our website. The links are in the description. Thank you again, and stay free.